All right, so ready to get off the grid.
Always ready.
Today we're diving deep into living off-grid homesteading.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, a guidebook absolutely packed with advice on embracing a more
Self-sufficient.
self-sufficient lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's so fascinating about off-grid living, right?
It really challenges how we think about, modern life.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about escaping bills.
Right.
It's about redefining how we interact with resources,
Exactly.
our communities, and even our own capabilities.
Yeah, and the guidebook kind of jumps right into that with financial planning.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to think about, oh, no more utility bills.
Right.
But is it really that simple?
Not necessarily.
Uh-huh.
The author, who's lived off-grid for years,
Okay.
points out that you're basically trading those monthly costs for a whole new set of financial things to think about.
So it's more like instead of those recurring bills, we're now looking at bigger upfront costs.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You might get a really good deal on some land.
Right.
But then you've got to think about, like, drilling a well, grading a road to get to the property.
Yeah, stuff that doesn't always come to mind right away.
Yeah, all those hidden costs can add up fast. The book even gives an example. A 10-acre plot might only cost you $20,000.
That seems pretty affordable.
Yeah, but then you need to add a well, a road,
Mm-hmm.
and that can be another $10,000 to $15,000.
Yeah.
So finding that cheap land
Right.
isn't always the best option when you're thinking long-term.
So instead of managing bills, we're managing projects.
Yeah.
It's a whole different skill set you need.
Absolutely. And the guidebook really emphasizes becoming a lifelong learner,
I like that.
mastering skills like gardening, carpentry, managing your own energy.
Oh, wow.
But maybe even more important, learning to see those inevitable oops moments, those failures,
yeah.
as stepping stones.
So like turning those construction fails into teachable moments.
Exactly. It's all about adapting and refining your approach.
Yeah.
Like in the book, they use this analogy of gardening. Your first garden, it might not do so well, but with each season, you learn, you adapt, and you start seeing success. And that mindset, that resilience, you can apply it to fixing a roof, optimizing your solar panels.
Okay, so our finances are sorted. We've got our learning hats on. What's next?
Let's talk gardening.
Okay.
It's a core element of off-grid living. Not just about aesthetics. It's about actually working with nature.
More than just buying some cute planters, huh?
Yeah, the guidebook actually dives into permaculture,
Oh, interesting.
which is all about building this self-sustaining ecosystem.
So you're not just growing plants, you're thinking about the bigger picture.
You're fostering relationships between the plants, the soil, the insects, everything.
I've heard about this like companion planting. I think some Native American cultures do this. They plant beans with corn and squash.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the Three Sisters method. The beans actually use the corn stalks to grow up.
Oh, cool.
The squash provides ground cover.
So it's like each one is supporting the others.
Yeah, you're creating a system where each element thrives. It's really cool.
So instead of just growing tomatoes, we're growing an entire ecosystem in our backyard.
Exactly.
But an ecosystem needs power, right? And everyone always talks about solar power.
Right.
Is it really all it's cracked up to be?
Solar's definitely popular, but this guidebook actually cautions against relying on just one source of energy.
Okay.
Off-grid living, it really thrives on diversification.
So it's like hedging your bets, energy-wise.
Yeah, there's no single perfect solution.
Mm-hmm.
It's about finding the right mix.
Got it.
Solar's great, but it's not always ideal. What if there's no sun?
Yeah, especially if you're living somewhere with like a lot of cloud cover.
Exactly. So the guidebook goes into wind power, hydropower,
Oh, wow.
even biomass. It's about choosing what's right for where you are.
So maybe like a hybrid system, combine solar with wind for more consistency.
Exactly. The book even gives an example of a system using solar and wind, or even biomass, for really steady power.
Makes sense. All right, so we've got food and energy. What's next? I think I know what's coming.
You probably do. It's the one we take for granted until it's gone.
Water.
Water, exactly.
And when you're off-grid, you're responsible for every drop.
You're responsible for every single drop. Clean water is non-negotiable. The book stresses that, and off-grid living means you're in charge of everything.
From finding it to making sure it's clean.
From collection
Yeah.
to purification, yeah. Rainwater harvesting is a great option,
Mm-hmm.
but you have to think about those dry periods. You need enough storage. Even if you've got you have to be smart about it.
Yeah.
Protect it, conserve it, don't deplete the water table.
You don't want to go through all this just to be high and dry.
No, definitely not.
Speaking of things going down the drain.
Right.
What about waste management off-grid? It's not like putting the bins out, is it?
No, it's totally different. Septic systems are pretty common.
Okay.
But the book emphasizes the importance of keeping them maintained.
Right.
You don't want any environmental issues.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's composting, and we're not just talking banana peels here. The book gets into vermiculture, which is using worms to break down waste.
Wow, I've heard about that.
Yeah.
So you're making your own fertilizer, basically.
Yeah, really rich fertilizer. It's pretty amazing.
So even our waste can be a resource when we're off-grid.
Yeah, there's this theme of everything being connected.
I like that. Which makes me think about the homestead itself. Are we building log cabins, or is there a better way?
Log cabins sound romantic, but the book actually recommends focusing on sustainability and making sure things work in the long run.
Okay.
It explores this concept of passive solar design.
I've heard about that. Isn't that just about making your house look good with lots of windows?
It's more than just that. It's about using the sun's energy to heat and cool your home.
So using the sun to basically regulate the temperature inside the house.
Exactly. And the guidebook actually gets pretty specific.
Okay.
It talks about where you position the house, the materials you choose, and even using things like overhangs or awnings to manage the temperature.
That's pretty ingenious.
It really is. And it's not just eco-friendly. It also means you're not relying on energy systems as much.
Which, as we talked about, can be a big undertaking.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes a lot of sense. But things don't always go as planned, right? What about the unexpected challenges of off-grid living?
You know, it's not always sunshine and roses. The book is honest about that. It emphasizes preparing yourself both mentally and physically for those curveballs.
What kind of curveballs are we talking about?
Well, one of the biggest challenges is limited access to healthcare emergency services.
Right, you can't just call 911 when you're miles from anywhere.
Exactly, and that can be a tough adjustment. The guidebook suggests getting first aid training, having a really good medical kit.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, because in a lot of situations, you're your own first responder.
So you really got to be self-reliant. But what about security? Doesn't living remotely make you more vulnerable?
Security is a big one, and the guidebook tackles it head on. It talks about physical barriers like fences, but also simpler things like having good lighting and a plan for what to do if there's a security issue.
Okay.
Think motion sensor lights, they deter intruders, but also save energy.
It's all connected, isn't it?
Yeah,
But all this self-sufficiency, I gotta ask, what about the social side of things?
that's where community comes in.
Okay.
And it's so much more important than you might think. Even though you're independent, it doesn't mean being alone.
So it's not about becoming a hermit, but about finding your tribe.
Exactly. The book talks about building a strong community, locally, A&D, globally.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So how does that work?
Locally, it's people you can trade skills with, help with repairs, just share a meal with. Globally, it's tapping into networks, like the Global Eco-Village Network.
What's that?
It connects you to people and projects all around the world that are about sustainable living.
Wow, that's amazing. So even though you're off on your own, you're part of something much bigger.
Yeah, you get that sense of shared purpose, access to so much knowledge.
That's really inspiring. But let's be real, this lifestyle takes a lot of planning, a lot of learning. It's not a walk in the park.
No, it's definitely not for everyone. But for those who are drawn to self-sufficiency, sustainability, connection to nature,
Yeah,
it can be incredibly rewarding.
absolutely. And for anyone who's intrigued and wants to learn more, living off-grid homesteading is the perfect resource.
It really is.
Full of practical advice and stories to inspire you, whether you're picturing a secluded homestead or just want to bring those off-grid principles into your everyday life.
It's a great starting point. But even if you're not ditching the grid completely,
Right.
those ideas of self-reliance, resourcefulness, community,
Yeah,
those are relevant to everyone.
I love that. So before we move on to the next stage of our deep dive into off-grid living, I'm curious, what's resonated with you most so far? What's got you thinking?
Yeah, what part of this lifestyle calls to you or maybe makes you hesitant?
We want to hear your thoughts. What unexpected challenges do you see? Let us know.
You know, one thing people don't always think about is how off-grid living changes your daily routine.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's not just a change of scenery.
Right.
It's a whole different pace of life.
It really is. It's about shifting how you approach each day.
So we're trading in traffic jams for, like, tending chickens and collecting rainwater?
Maybe, yeah. But seriously, there are some day-to-day realities that can take people by surprise.
Okay, give me an example.
Imagine waking up to roosters instead of your phone alarm.
I could get used to that.
Right. Your day might revolve around when the sun rises and sets.
Okay.
Tending your garden, chopping firewood, keeping an eye on your energy systems.
It's a lot more hands-on.
Yeah,
More connected to the rhythms of nature.
exactly. And those rhythms are going to be different depending on where you live,
Oh, yeah, good point. Like living off-grid in the desert versus the mountains, those are two totally different ballgames.
You got it. Climate and geography, they have a huge impact on your off-grid experience.
Mm-hmm.
The guidebook actually stresses that you need to choose a location that aligns with both your needs and your skills.
Makes sense.
It even talks about these things called microclimates.
Microclimate.
Yeah, like these little pockets within a region
Mhm.
that have their own unique weather patterns.
Oh, wow. So even within the same area,
Mm-hmm.
there can be variations that could affect like how much rain you get, the
Totally.
temperature, even the soil.
Yeah, and those variations, they can make or break your off-grid experience.
Oh, I bet.
Like if you have long, cloudy winters,
Mm-hmm.
solar power might not be the best choice.
Mm.
Or if you're in the desert, you'll need to be extra careful about conserving water.
So choosing the right location is like step one.
It's the foundation of your whole off-grid life.
Yeah.
Get it wrong, and everything else becomes so much harder.
Yeah. You really don't want to realize that after you've already moved in.
Right. So research is key, and this book really emphasizes that not just climate research, but also looking into access to resources,
Okay.
local regulations, even the risk of natural disasters. You want to minimize those surprises down the line.
All right. So let's say we've done our research. We found that perfect piece of land. What's next? Do we just start building our dream homestead?
Hold your horses.
Mm.
The guidebook recommends a phased approach.
Phased approach.
Yeah, you start with the essentials
Okay.
and gradually scale up as you get more comfortable, as your budget allows, and as your skills develop.
So don't try to build this fully functional, self-sufficient paradise all at once.
That would be pretty overwhelming.
And probably really expensive.
Exactly. The book says prioritize the things you need to survive.
Right.
Basic shelter, a dependable water supply, basic utilities.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking maybe a small cabin or a yurt,
Okay.
a well, or a rainwater harvesting system, and maybe a small solar setup with a wood stove for heat.
It's like starting with the bare minimum and building from there.
Yeah. And that's much more manageable. Right.
Definitely. And you can make adjustments as you go.
Exactly. And it's not just about the cost. It's also about giving yourself time to learn and adapt.
Mm.
Each phase informs the next.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have the basics down, then you can start thinking about adding things like a greenhouse, expanding your energy system.
Maybe even building that workshop you've always dreamed of.
Exactly. It's a journey, not a race.
And speaking of workshops,
Yeah.
we haven't talked much about homestead design yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there certain design principles that are important for off-grid living?
Absolutely. The guidebook gets into sustainable design, starting with something we touched on earlier, passive solar design.
Oh, yeah, right.
Remember, it's not just about having a bunch of windows to make your house look pretty.
Right. It's about using the sun to heat and cool the house.
Exactly. Turning your home into a natural temperature regulator.
So clever.
And the book goes into detail about how to do that. Strategically positioning your home, choosing the right materials, using overhangs and awnings. It's pretty fascinating. It really is.
Yeah.
What about the actual building materials themselves? Is there a best option when you're building an off-grid home?
That's where things get interesting. The guidebook compares conventional building materials with more eco-friendly ones.
Okay, like what?
It covers everything from concrete and brick to things like straw bale construction, cob, even earth bags.
Wait, earth bags, like using bags of dirt to build walls.
Yep, it might sound a little strange,
Yeah.
but it's a really effective and sustainable method.
Wow.
Earth bags are readily available, they provide excellent insulation, and they're super cost-effective.
Plus you get to play in the dirt.
Exactly. It's a great way to get your hands dirty and learn a new skill.
I love a good DIY project. But for those of us who aren't so into getting our hands dirty, what about prefabricated homes? Are those a good option for off-grid living?
That's a question a lot of people have. The guidebook talks about the pros and cons of prefab homes,
Okay.
especially for those who want to build quickly and maybe save some money.
Right.
But it also warns that not all prefab homes are created equal.
So you can't just pick any prefab home and expect it to work seamlessly off-grid.
Exactly. You have to really evaluate the materials,
Mm-hmm.
the energy efficiency, how adaptable they are to an off-grid lifestyle.
Makes sense.
And it even suggests looking into tiny homes and container homes. Those have become pretty popular with off-gridders.
Container homes, like those big metal shipping containers.
Yeah.
Those ones.
That's a cool way to recycle.
Right. The guidebook explains how those containers can be transformed into really comfortable and functional living spaces.
I can see it. They're like giant Lego blocks.
Exactly. They're durable, readily available, and they can be insulated and equipped with off-grid systems.
It sounds like you can get really creative with container homes.
You really can. All right, so we've talked about the big picture of homestead design, but we haven't really gotten to the nitty-gritty of setting up those essential utilities.
Right. Like how do we actually power up, get water, and manage waste on our off-grid homestead? That's what we're going to tackle next. Get ready to roll up your sleeves and dive into the nuts and bolts of self-sufficient living.
Okay, everyone, grab your metaphorical tool belts. We're about to get hands-on with the utilities that make off-grid living a reality. Okay, so tools ready, time to dive into the practical side of those off-grid utilities. Let's start with water. It's amazing how much we rely on just turning on a tap.
It really is, until you have to think about where every drop comes from.
Exactly. So, rainwater harvesting, what's not to love, seems both practical and kind of magical. I love the idea of capturing rain. It feels very connected to nature.
Yeah, it's such a great way to use a free and usually plentiful resource. But the guidebook makes it clear that a good rainwater harvesting system is more than just putting a bucket outside.
Right. I figured there'd be more to it.
You'll need gutters, downspouts, filters, and of course a good storage tank. The book even gets into these things called first flush diverters.
First flush diverters, what are those? Some sort of water guardian?
Pretty much. They help divert that initial runoff from your roof, which might have debris or contaminants in it. So the water going into your tank is as clean as possible.
Smart. So rainwater harvesting sounds pretty awesome, but what about places where it doesn't rain a lot or when there's a drought?
That's where having a well comes in. The guidebook explains that drilling a well can give you a much more reliable water source over the long term, especially in areas with a good water table.
Makes sense, but I'm guessing this isn't something you do yourself, right? You can't just dig a hole and hope for the best.
Definitely not a DIY project. The book really stresses the importance of hiring professionals who know what they're doing to assess your land and do the installation. It's an investment, but worth it for the peace of mind knowing you have a reliable water source.
Absolutely. So whether you're catching rainwater or drilling a well, it sounds like having more than one source of water is a good idea.
It's always smart to have a backup plan. And no matter how you're getting your water, the guidebook is really big on conservation. Treating water like the valuable resource it is becomes even more important when you're managing it yourself.
So using things like low-flow shower heads and faucets, water-wise gardening, even maybe a gray water system.
All great ideas. The guidebook covers all those and more. Low-flow fixtures are an easy and fairly cheap way to cut back on water use, and gray water systems can take the water from your sinks and showers and use it to water your garden.
Love that. It's all about minimizing waste and using every resource to its fullest. Speaking of resources, what about energy? Another one we tend to take for granted.
Yeah, time to power up and say goodbye to those monthly energy bills.
I'm all for that, but is it really as simple as installing a few solar panels?
If only it were that easy.
Yeah.
The guidebook emphasizes that to be truly energy independent off-grid, you need to plan carefully and understand how much energy you actually use.
And I'm sensing a theme here: diversify those energy sources.
You got it. The book encourages looking at all the different options: wind power, hydropower, even using biomass. And you can even combine different sources like solar and wind for a more consistent energy supply.
Kind of like an energy portfolio, spreading the risk and maximizing the returns.
Exactly. And regardless of what energy source you go with, the guidebook really stresses having good energy storage. Batteries are crucial for those times when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing.
With having a cleaner, quieter backup generator.
Exactly. And while we're on the topic of energy, the guidebook also gets into conservation tips. Things like energy-efficient appliances, using LED lights, and even those good old-fashioned habits like turning off lights when you leave a room.
It all adds up, right?
It really does. Little changes can make a big difference in the long run. Okay, ready to tackle a less glamorous but equally important part of off-grid living: waste management.
Let's do it. No more garbage trucks or sewer systems.
Right. You become responsible for dealing with your own waste.
Yeah.
Composting becomes a really important part of that, turning your food scraps and yard waste into valuable soil for your garden.
It's almost alchemical, turning trash into treasure. But what about the stuff you can't compost?
Well, septic systems are pretty common for wastewater. The book goes into how they work, but also reminds us how important proper maintenance is to avoid any environmental problems. For those looking for even more sustainable options, it also talks about composting toilets.
Composting toilets. They're getting more popular, but I have to admit I don't know much about them.
They're actually pretty efficient and environmentally friendly.
So even waste can be a resource in the off-grid world. Closing the loop. Okay, there's one more thing I'm curious about that seems to go hand in hand with off-grid living livestock. Fresh eggs, cute chickens running around. It seems so idyllic.
It's definitely a rewarding part of off-grid living. But the guidebook cautions that raising livestock successfully takes careful planning. And you need to really understand what your land can handle.
So it's more than just buying some cute animals and letting them roam free.
Definitely. You need to choose animals that suit your climate, the amount of land you have, and even your own experience and skills. The book suggests starting small, maybe with a few chickens or rabbits, to get some experience before getting larger animals like goats or cows.
So it's like an apprenticeship in animal care.
Exactly. And the book emphasizes doing things sustainably. Rotational grazing, composting manure, making sure your animals have proper shelter and care. It's about creating a balance between your livestock and the land.
Makes sense. Speaking of balance, we've talked a lot about self-sufficiency, but what about the role of community in off-grid living? It seems like a bit of a contradiction.
It might seem counterintuitive, but the guidebook emphasizes that being completely isolated can be a bad thing. Humans are social, and even off-gridders need connection and support.
So it's not about being a lone wolf, but about finding your pack, even if they're scattered all over the place.
Exactly. The book talks about the importance of building both local and global communities. Local connections are great for practical help, maybe bartering skills, helping with repairs, or just sharing meals and company. Global networks, on the other hand, allow for broader sharing of knowledge and resources. It even mentions organizations like the Global Eco-Village Network, which connects people involved in sustainable living projects around the world.
It's like tapping into a global network of off-grid knowledge and inspiration.
It really is. And that sense of shared purpose can be really motivating, especially when you're facing those inevitable off-grid challenges.
This deep dive into off-grid living has been so eye-opening. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all solution. It takes a ton of planning, a willingness to learn and adapt, and a good sense of community.
It's not the right path for everyone. But for those looking for self-sufficiency, a sustainable way of life, and a deeper connection to nature, it can be an incredibly rewarding journey.
And if you want to explore these ideas further, Living Off-Grid Homesteading is an amazing resource. It's full of practical advice and inspiring stories to help you on your way.
Yeah, whether you're picturing a secluded homestead or just want to bring a little bit of that off-grid spirit into your everyday life, it's a great place to start.
I love that. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into off-grid living. We'll be back next week exploring a whole new topic. Until then, keep exploring.